In the last video we talked about how the Opel Senator was styled exterior wise and interior wise, and we also talked a bit about the predecessors such as the Opel, Captain, Admiral and Diplomat. And we talked also a little bit about the engines. And in the second part, this part, we're going to talk about these engines and diving in a bit deeper, as well as going to be talking about competition. The Opel Senator was powered by carburetor and fuel injected engines, and particularly in the first phase, the A1 between 1978 and 1982, primarily carbureted engines were available, as between 1978 and 1981, the smallest engine was the 2.5S, which was a carbureted engine, and as said before, this produced the least amount of power, 113 horsepower and 176 newton meters of torque, giving the car a 0 to 100 time of 11.5 seconds up to 13.5 seconds, and a top speed of 175 to 180 kilometers an hour, all while having a, in my opinion, quite high fuel consumption of 11.5 to 12.5 liters per 100 kilometers. And this eventually was succeeded by a fuel injected 2.5E. By the way, all of the marks and times and top speeds that I mentioned, the highest one, the highest top speed is for the 4-speed manual or the 5-speed manual, and the lowest top speed is for the 3-speed or 4-speed automatic. As well as for the 0 to 100 times, the lowest 0 to 100 time is for the manual and the highest is for the automatic. And fuel consumption wise, the lowest fuel consumption is for the manual and the highest is for the automatic, as the automatic transmissions were slower, decreased the top speed, and also had a bit higher fuel consumption. As well as the 2.8S was also available from the start, and this also was available up until 1981, but it had a lot more power, 138 horsepower and 214 newton meters, giving the Senator a better 0 to 100 time of 10.5 to 12.5 seconds, and also a more suitable top speed of 185 to 190 kilometers an hour, all while weirdly enough having a fuel consumption lower than the 2.5S at 11.3 to 12.3 liters per 100 kilometers. And the 2.5S also actually was available in the Opel Commodore C at that point, but the 2.8S wasn't. It was really a Senator engine only. You also had, for those seeking more power, the 3-liter S, and the only difference was that this was a bit bigger and was available up until 1982, between 1978 to 1982. This had 10 horsepower more than 2.8S because it was only slightly bigger, having 148 horsepower, 233 newton meters of torque, giving the car a, at that point, very decent 0 to 100 time of 10 seconds for the manual to 11.5 seconds for the automatic. And also the top speed was very high at 188 to 193 kilometers an hour, all while having a not that bad fuel consumption of 12.2 to 12.6 liters per 100 kilometers. But this engine eventually was also succeeded by a fuel injected engine, being the 3-liter E. The 3-liter E actually already was on the market between 1978 and 1986, being the whole generation being able to be fitted with a 3-liter E, and this also had a lot more power than the 3-liter S, with 178 horsepower and 248 newton meters of torque, giving the car also a much better 0 to 100 time than the 3-liter S, of this time only 9 seconds to 10.5 seconds, and also having a higher top speed of 205 to 210 kilometers an hour, all while actually having a similar but sometimes also a bit lower fuel consumption of 12 to 12.6 liters per 100 kilometers. As said before, the 2.5S eventually got replaced by the 2.5E in 1981, and the 2.5E was available between 1981 to 1984, so it was available in the A1 and also the early phases of the A2. This had 134 horsepower and 185 newton meters of torque, basically being much better than the 2.5S actually was, also having a better 0 to 100 time of 11.5 to 13 seconds, and also having a better top speed of 185 to 190 kilometers an hour, all while having a fuel consumption slightly better than the 2.5S, between 11 to 12 liters per 100 kilometers. And eventually the 2.5E also got succeeded, all within the same generation of the Senator, being succeeded by the 2.5i, basically being more torquey and also being a fuel injected engine. In 1982, also for the second phase of the first generation of the Senator, Opel introduced the 2-liter E, and although being available between 1982 to 1984, this was only fitted in the facelifted versions, so from model year 1983 and onward to 1984. And this had between 109 to 113 horsepower, as in later phases the car had more horsepower and slightly decreased in an amount of torque. And also the torque this engine has was 162 newton meters first, and later when the 113 horsepower replaced the 109 horsepower, this was slightly decreased to 160 newton meters. The 0 to 100 time actually, somewhat was a bit of a big gap in my opinion, as in this period also the 3-speed automatic was replaced by a 4-speed, also giving the car a better 0 to 100 time, as the 0 to 100 times for this engine was between 12.6, which is actually decent, to 16 seconds. Top speed wise, it was also very decent, only being a 2-liter 4-cylinder, as the top speed was between 175 to 180 km an hour. And because it was only a 2-liter engine, the fuel consumption also was much lower than in the other engines, as the average fuel consumption was between 9.2 to 10 liters per 100 kilometers. And not to mention that this car was 4 meters and 85 centimeters in length, being around 1400 kilograms, so this was actually very decent. But this engine didn't last until the end of the Senator, as it got discontinued in 1984, being succeeded by a more torquey 2.2i taken out of the Opel Record E. The 2.2i was available between 1984 to 1986. This engine had 113 horsepower and 182 newton meters, being available with a 4 or a 5-speed manual, and actually had a 0 to 100 time much better, between 12.2 and around 14 seconds from 0 to 100. The fuel consumption also was much better, as it was around 9.1 to 9.5 liters per 100 kilometers. As said before, the 2.5e, which also was fuel injected, eventually got succeeded by the 2.5i in 1984, and the 2.5i was available between 1984 to 1986 until the end of the car. It had 138 horsepower, 205 newton meters of torque, giving the car a 0 to 100 time of between 10.5 and 12 seconds, also giving the car an estimated fuel consumption of around 9.5 to 10.5 liters per 100 kilometers. Eventually, you had the best of the best with the fuel injected engines beside the 3-liter E, and this was available between 1985 in the last model year to 1986, and this basically had a catalytic converter and was fuel injected, but had less power than the 3-liter E, as the 3-liter I had 154 horsepower, 226 newton meters of torque, giving the car a 0 to 100 time of 10 to 11 seconds, and having a top speed of 192 to 202 kilometers an hour. Although being actually a fuel injected engine already having a lower fuel consumption actually still was quite high at between 11.2 to 11.3 liters per 100 kilometers, and this mostly was because of the catalytic converter this engine had. As said before, the Senator also had diesel engines, although only being two 2.3 liter diesel engines, and as mentioned before, these were introduced since 1983, as the 2.3 liter turbo diesel was available between 1983 to 1986, and this had 85 horsepower and 189 newton meters, giving the car at that point it was actually quite okay, 0 to 100 time of 16.5 to 18.5 seconds, while actually having a decent top speed of 164 to 167 kilometers an hour, giving the car a very low fuel consumption at that point of 7.6 liters per 100 kilometers. But as said before, you also had a diesel engine with a Comprex charger. This was the 2.3 Comprex D, which was available on demand between 1985 to 1986. This had 94 horsepower, 195 Newton meters, giving the car a 0 to 100 time lower than the 2.3 turbo diesel of 15 seconds, as this engine only was available with a 5-speed manual. This power increase also gave the car a higher top speed of 172 km an hour, while actually having a bit higher fuel consumption of 7.7 liters per 100 kilometers. These engines were only made in a special series of 700 units. The most prestigious version of the Senator was the CD, always equipped with a 3-liter inline 6, being either the 3-liter E or the later 3-liter I. It featured a host of luxury features, distinctive exterior trim, and was Opel's attempt to compete directly with the likes of Mercedes-Benz and BMW. The CD badge signaled the highest comfort and technology Opel could provide, such as even a digital dashboard from 1984 and onwards. Pricing-wise, it was also the most expensive, as the cheapest Senator cost around half the price of the CD, being around 27 Deutsche Marke, while the CD cost between 37,250 Deutsche Marke in 1978 to 53,100 Deutsche Marke in 1986. And besides the CD, the most fascinating offshoot of the Senator A was the Bitter SC, built by the small German manufacturer Bitter Automobile between 1981 and 1989, 3 years after the discontinuation of the Senator A. The SC used the Senator chassis and mechanicals, but clothed in with exotic Italian-style coupe or cabriolet body, and the interiors were handcrafted with fine leather, and the car became a rare but striking presence. Of the Bitter SC, fewer than 500 were ever produced, making it one of the most collectible cars linked to the Senator platform ever. And competition-wise, the Senator's competitors were the Mercedes-Benz S-Class, either being the 116 or the W126, as the W116 actually got succeeded by the W126 in 1980, as well as the BMW 7 Series, being the E23, as well as high-end versions of the BMW 5 Series, being either the E12 and the E28, because the Senator actually was a bit of a downsize from its original CAT measurements. You also had other cars within Europe, such as the Peugeot 604, Volvo 760, and also Jaguar XJ, and these cars occupied similar territory. And while Opel could not match the brand prestige of Mercedes or BMW, the Senator often undercut them on price while still offering impressive comfort and equipment, and for many buyers it was a sensible yet prestigious alternative to these brands. As one of the Senator's strongest selling points was its price. While Opel lacked the prestige of BMW and Mercedes-Benz, it positioned the Senator as a value-rich alternative of these cars, offering nearly the same comfort and performance for noticeably less money. And this also could be seen in the sales figures, that it was actually quite successful, as the sales launch was successful, as from January to March 1979, 9,405 new Senator or Monza registrations were registered in Germany, compared to 10,447 Mercedes-Benz S-Class or SLCs and 5,462 BMW 6 Series or 7 Series. This gave the Senator or Monza's market share in the luxury segment a good third place. Although the sales figures eventually decreased as a result of the second oil crisis in the autumn of 1979. Another example for the Senator's cheaper price was in 1980, for example, as Mercedes-Benz's 280 SE, the W116 generation with around 185 horsepower and an automatic transmission, cost well over 30,000 Deutsche Marks in Germany, and a BMW 728i E23 was priced in a similar range, also depending on equipment. And by contrast, the Opel Senator with the 3-liter E 6-cylinder with 180 horsepower could be purchased for around 23 to 25,000 Deutsche Mark, undercutting both rivals by several thousand marks. Predecessor and successor-wise, the Opel Senator replaced the heavy V8 power Opel Diplomat B, but also the smaller powered Opel Admiral and the Opel Kapitän. These actually were somewhat predecessors, although being actually aimed at a different market, as those were really luxury vehicles, while the Senator actually was a step smaller. And it was eventually succeeded by the Opel Senator B in 1987, a more aerodynamic and technically advanced model that struggled within the market sadly, marking Opel's eventual retreat from the executive class. And between 1978 and 1986, a total of 133,239 Opel Senator A's were produced, of which only 2,368 diesels, with the most popular engine being the 3-liter E, with 33,352 units made, almost 1/4 of the total production. Thank you for watching this video. In order to be able to upload more videos in the future, please consider becoming a member of my channel or sending a super thanks on this video. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Don't forget to check out this playlist with many interesting videos covering various parts of the automotive industry, and I will see you in the next video.